typically for growth, you have to go through some pain.
If I was getting started, I wouldn't want to go into a workout and think, man, I could have done that 3 more times.
And so what you have to do is you have to, number one, make sure you're running safe. Now with Mark, he was heel striking. Because he's not trying to be a competitive runner, he's not trying to become a specialist, he just wants to use running to help his fitness, I wouldn't work on his technique.
And there's a lot of benefits, the increased vascularization, the increased capillarization, increasing appetite, a concurrent strength or hypertrophy thing is something that you're interested in. Heart health, there's a lot of benefits that come along with that.
Top singles, top triples, these things come down to neurological efficiency. And at the other end of the spectrum, you can condition yourself to be very efficient with volume.
I'm assuming you're not exclusively nasal breathing.
No, to be honest, I have no rhyme or rhythm for the way I'm breathing. I just let it happen on its own.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're the same way with your running too, right? You haven't really I'm sure you studied it a little bit, but like you aren't super meticulous with it. You just happen to run a lot better now than you did in the beginning, probably a lot through trial and error.
Yeah, I think there's definitely cues that you can look out for and keep in mind and be conscious of in terms of running or breathing. What I've kind of applied is that I think my body will become a more efficient machine the longer I do something.
Yeah.
And it just finds its rhyme or rhythm on its own. I've tried to self-correct certain things. And when I self-correct one thing, then I'm trying to address another thing. And I found that if you look at my run form now compared to 3 years ago, it's night and day just because my body has become more efficient.
And along with that, since we're kind of talking form here, as far as the way your feet strike the ground when you run, there's a lot of different parties when it comes, especially when it comes to different types of marathons. Ultra marathons, they seem to be more okay with a heel to I don't know, what's the
like a
ball
roll,
of the foot?
rock,
Yeah, a roll. And then other like 26s or 13s, they're like more on the ball of your foot, depending on your pace. Do you fall on any end of that spectrum, or did you just let your body fall into it? What do you think?
Yeah, I just let my body fall into it. I think it's one of those things that everyone has a different opinion on.
Mm-hmm.
And we had this really cool run coach come out to our facility about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Her Instagram is RunRx. And she has some really good instructional stuff for run forms and efficiencies.
Mm-hmm.
And she worked with us a lot in terms of improving your run form. But one of the things she said that I'll never forget is you should never think of your running as a strike. And you hear of heel strike, forefront strike.
Yeah.
And she said, if you're striking something, it's a quick jab. So she kind of refers to it as, she shows you how to run in place, kind of on the balls of your feet.
Mm-hmm.
And to move forward, you just lean into it. And when you lean into it, your body will naturally, through gravity, move a certain direction. So she said when she ran her first marathon, at the end of it, her legs weren't even tired because she wasn't striking. She was pulling. She pulls her leg up with almost her hamstring and her glute. She was pulling and falling.
Doesn't WEC talk about that?
Yeah, and you're just springy, right? Like the ankle and the foot of the human body is an amazing thing, and it's like a spring. And if you're running in the way that you're referencing, you get to take advantage of that. You're just trying to be kind of light on your feet, and you don't have to. I've noticed for myself personally, like I don't have to concentrate on a whole lot. I mean, I could be in the middle of a run and I could say, oh, it'd probably be good if we just tilt forward a little bit. Like I can feel certain things now. I might notice, you're not really moving your knees hardly at all. Like bring those up a bit. I can notice some of that stuff, but as I've been running more, it seems to just be naturally getting a little bit better. And keep in mind too, we're mainly talking about like jogging and running. Sprinting is a completely different animal, in my opinion.
Well, I heard someone explain it the other day as if you want to run faster, move quicker, don't move harder. So what happens when you try to run harder is you're going to overstride, you're going to strike, you're going to overstretch. But if you want to move quicker, just move your feet faster. Because I used to always say it's a lot more complicated than just telling someone to run faster. But if you think about it, if you just move your feet a little quicker rather than trying to run harder, it makes sense.
What you were pointing out about the style of training that you utilize where you're running slow to run faster. Again, when we had Chris Hinshaw on the show, he talked about Jason Khalipa. And Jason Khalipa is just an absolute monster athlete in just about anything that the guy does. And he just was able to run pretty fast, but he just wasn't able to, he couldn't figure out how to sustain that speed. And Chris Henshaw asked him, he's like, well, I don't know, like how long does it take you to do like a 400 or something like that? And Jason's like, I don't know, like 40, one lap around the track, sorry. Jason's like, I don't know, like 45 seconds or something. And his whole point was like, speed was not an issue for Jason Khalipa. It was being able to hold on to it and maintain it. So you can think about anybody that possesses the ability to run, they could certainly run faster if it's in a shorter, if it's a shorter distance. So then trying to figure out how do I run pretty fast, even half that speed for a long distance? Well, we're going to have to have something that we can progress over time that is not going to be devastating to recover from. And it ends up being a lot of the same things that we end up finding out in the gym. You know, if you want to, so many times people ask me about getting a stronger bench. And when they're pretty vague about it, I can't really help them identify exactly what the issue may be. But more often than not, the answer is to reduce the weight. And what should I do to increase my squat? What should I do to increase my deadlift? The answer is the same for all three of those lifts. Decrease the weight, get the repetitions, and do them correctly. Do 5 sets of 5 and do all 5 sets and all 5 reps. All 25 reps should look very similar. It really shouldn't be broken. They shouldn't be, it shouldn't look like crap. And if you think about your running, if you're trying to increase your running, well, if we run at a nice, good, smooth clip and there's no decline, you're not starting out at a 6-minute mile pace and then all of a sudden tanking and just crumbling and turning into a soup sandwich, then you're probably going about doing it the right way.
Yeah, because you're working two different systems there. You're working the aerobic system, cardiovascular system, and the muscular system. One's going to give out. You know, if say for example you're doing a 400 and you're all out sprint and you can't hold that, your cardiovascular system, your aerobic system isn't efficient enough to hold that. Same goes the other way possibly. So it's finding that combination of building muscular endurance as well as aerobic cardiovascular endurance.
What is this doing for your brain?
A lot.
Because there's a runner's high, right?
That's what they say. I mean, it took me years to feel like this high. So
wow.
I made a post on Instagram today actually, talking about solitude, because everyone that tries running after they see me talk about it says you're full of shit.
What's that word mean?
Solitude. It's having, to me, it's having these deep internal thoughts where there's no distractions. You can navigate issues in your life. You can reach depths of issues you're having or find solutions. And for me, it's like, you know, for solitude, for some people it might be meditation.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I wake up at 5 a.m. I have my morning routine. By 5:45, running shoes are on. I'm running out the door and I'm logging miles. And it's dark. It is the same route every morning. I see maybe 2 people, 1 dog. I've that route dialed in. And by mile 3, I forget I'm running anymore. And any issue that is occurring in my life, any problem, it's going to find me during that run. And I'm going to navigate it to the depths of wherever I need to take it. Like I talked about earlier with you guys, the book Deep Work by Cal Newport.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. And when I was reading it, it made me realize the parallels between what deep work is intended to be and how running provides that for me. In the beginning, I didn't find that at all. It was survival. It was a sufferfest. That's what running was.
Sufferfest.
It was a pure sufferfest. And then slowly I started getting some like mental clarity out of it. And like I talked about, I started getting emotional on some of these runs. I'd be running, I'd be thinking about my life or my wife, and now the baby on the way. I think about the baby all the time, my morning runs, and the father I want to be. And it's this moment of clarity where there's no phone, there's no emails. It seems like the world is asleep still. It's dark, and I can just navigate any issue I have in my life. And that's where I think of my best business ideas, marketing campaigns, what I'm going to do next, who I need to hire, who I need to fire, like anything in terms of business and life. For me now, my morning run is not a physical gain. It is a mental gain for sure.
In regards to, because like what Mark was saying, you know, when you first start something, as you get a little bit older, you might get hurt, right? So if I wanted to take up running and I wanted to progress in it, how do I not progress too slow? Like, how do I not push myself enough? You know, like if I go out and like, all right, I'm going to run a quarter of this lap, and like, good job, Andrew, you crushed it today. And then I walk the 75% of it and I go home. Like, man, I don't know why I'm not getting any better. Like, how do you progress just like for just a simple person trying to get in shape, or maybe like myself just trying to pick up running? How do I know how fast to push and how hard to push in the very beginning?
I think you just gotta apply some common sense to it a little bit, where it's apply pressure, apply a stimulus to where you don't feel like you're overdoing it. But I mean, if I was getting started, I wouldn't want to go into a workout and think, man, I could have done that 3 more times. I'm gonna go home and treat myself. It's kind of, okay, where do I feel like I've gotten a little bit better today? And I've pushed, but to a point where I can still come back tomorrow and push a little bit more, where you're not destroying yourself. My current coach right now, Jeff Cunningham, he says this thing, it's better to be occasionally good. No, sorry. It's better to be consistently good rather than occasionally great. So he says he has some athletes sometimes who will come out and they want to impress everyone out on the track. So they will go all out. They will have blood squirting out of their eyeballs just to be number one on that track workout for the day. But then they can't show up for the next 7 days for the easy runs because they've destroyed themselves for that workout.
You know what I'm thinking about right now.
Well, I'm thinking about what Mark had said. Well, I think he called them like practice squad MVPs or something like that.
Yeah. Practice All-Americans.
Practice All-Americans.
Yeah, like dudes like in football, they would like line up, like the defender would line up like right in the spot that they knew you're running the ball, because they know the whole offense. So it's
Same
like
team.
It's like, dude, get the fuck out of the way. Like you don't normally line up there. Like that's not your normal position. And they're like already halfway cheating it, and you're like, dude, come on, what are you doing? Get out of here.
It's also reminiscent of just like people in the gym, man.
Oh, gotcha.
Like people that be doing like these crazy lifts in the gym for the gram, but then they're too fucked up or they injure themselves trying to do something they shouldn't be doing.
Constantly testing their strength and not allowing themselves to grow too, right? It's like, fuck, you could be so much stronger if you stop doing that bullshit.
I mean, the truth is, like, consistency is not sexy, and it never will be. It's like, that's what's the issue with the stuff on Instagram with these massive like viral workout videos is that is the sexy stuff that people want to see, but no one wants to watch someone. I guess they watch me, but most people don't want to watch someone just go run 10 miles easy every morning because it's not sexy. But I think we're making our way to where people are finding consistency sexy again.
Why are you the most hated man in running?
I think because I won't say I'm the most hated guy in running.
We had a conversation earlier, but for some reason runners don't like you.
I think it's because
you look like a skinny bitch.
Oh!
Take that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one, it's I don't look like your typical runner. I think I'm slowly starting to look more like your typical runner, but when I first started, I wasn't.
Hell no.
And I think another part is because I announced my goals publicly of what I'm going to train for. Whether I achieve them or not, I make it publicly known that this is what I'm trying to do, and this is the journey I'm going to document. And that makes some people uncomfortable. So like when I announced that I was going to train for this sub 3 hour marathon last year, there's like this forum called Let's Run. I never went on it because I didn't want to let myself go see it. But apparently there were like all these threads on there. I was getting DMs from people saying you will never do this.
And these are people in the running community?
Yeah.
Why? Okay.
So it was people coming after it that, one, I didn't look like the runner, and two, I was announcing, because sub 3 is a respectable time, and people didn't want me to do it. So then when I did it, obviously everyone said he cheated.
Look at the shoes he's wearing.
Yeah, it was all this.
Because of all those steroids he's using.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, performance enhancers.
It was all this cheating stuff. Like, it was wild. But I think it's part of it. And I used to really let that stuff bother me, because when you start creating content online, you want people to like you and respect you and trust you. And I remember the first time I ever put content out online. It was 2012. It was in my college dorm room, and it was when the bodybuilding.com forums were popular. So I said, I'm going to help people. I had this pre-workout meal that I used to have every day in college before I work out. I was like, I'm going to share this with the world because it'll help people. So I went and I made this thread on bodybuilding.com forum, and I shared like best pre-workout meal that you need to try. And I listed all the ingredients, the macros. And I came back from class later that day thinking it was going to be like all these people praising me for it. And it was all this shit. Like, everyone was telling me how stupid I was for this meal and how it was horrible. And that was my first exposure to, man, like people really didn't like that. And then when you start creating more content, you realize there's a lot of pushback. There's a lot of negativity where now I don't expose myself to it anymore. I don't read comments.
Yeah.
I don't read it because it will, whether I want it to or not, it will affect me, and the way I create and the way I build my business.
So if somebody is following you for running, like running is the sexy stuff, what's the unsexy stuff about running that you have to do that people don't want to talk about or maybe don't want to share?
Just the slow, easy runs you're doing every single day. I mean, that's one of them. Is a lot of the workouts we showcase in the marathon prep are the track workouts, the tempo workouts, the big marathon prep workouts, like the big 20, 22 mile workouts. Those are fun. Those are hard, but it's not really cool to watch someone run 11 miles easy and slow. Right. Or just like people want to see diet all the time. My diet really doesn't change. Like it is very regimen and routine. It's pretty much the same thing every single day. It doesn't change too much other than dinner based off my wife is craving that evening and pregnancy cravings. But it's just that it's consistency. I mean, I can say in a humble way that I am a very consistent person in terms of training, business, showing up, and doing the non-sexy stuff over and over again, because that is where I see the return, and I'm okay with that.
You think previously, do you think you had the same training going into the event, and it was the mindset that kind of got you over it, or was there some different things going on with training as well?
That is a damn good question. You ask a very good question there. It was both. In the spring of 1989, I went to New Zealand and trained for 6 weeks down there with a compatriot, this guy, Scott Molina, a guy who ended up winning Ironman one time. And New Zealand back in 1989, there were no cell phones, there was no laptops, there was no communication with the Northern Hemisphere. So for 6 weeks, my life was simplified. I just trained. I was in this absolutely beautiful rural environment on the South Island, just roads and trails and just every day you get up and you go on a different trail or different ride, and like, wow, super inspiring, right? And my life was so simplified that all of a sudden I just was able to do this massive volume of training and recover from it. And it was the first time I realized, if I simplify my life, what I can do with my sport is very different than if I occupy a big portion of my life with other stuff that has nothing to do with helping me be a better athlete. And so I took that incredible experience home with me and carried that through the remainder of my career, and just continually tried to just keep my life simple and simplified. And I think that's a really big challenge today. I mean, just think of all the stuff you're looking at on your phone all the day long. I mean, people come home from training, they do a huge training session, they lay on the couch, and then they're scrolling and posting and reading, and their mind is like on high alert for the next 2 hours, even though they think they're resting. But your mind has to rest too. I think it's a real challenge today to actually find that like quiet space.
And what is it that you're looking at? You're looking at other stuff in the thing that you're interested in. So probably, causing you to be like, oh man, that guy's training this way and this person's training that way.
Yeah.
Throw you off even more.
Yeah. And there's very few people that post their really crappy days.
Right.
They're posting all their amazing training camps and, all their stuff. And you're just going, whoa.
Yeah. So coming from New Zealand, what did you strip? Like, what did you actually change in your life specifically?
Just being busy. Like, how it is like on vacation, you have all the time in the world. When you're home, even if you're not doing anything, you're busy day and night doing whatever, something around the house or going shopping or you're fixing something up or you're thinking about something you can do to the house, And I had none of that in New Zealand.
It's like a training camp.
Yeah. And so I really tried to bring that training camp sort of way of experiencing things day in and day out into my home life at home. And so we just simplified things. We didn't do as much outward social stuff. I didn't feel like I had to occupy free time with something.
Okay.
And it's very different to have a free hour where you're just chilling versus a free hour where you're occupying yourself with something.
You're mentioning taking some naps. Were you pretty diligent about that? Was that something where you're like, this time every day, I'm going to take a nap?
It wasn't a conscious choice, but it was definitely something that I did. I love my sleep, right? And when I would do a big training session, I'd come home, and usually it was, even the long days were done by 1 or 2. And I would come home and have a lunch and lay down, and that 45 minutes or whatever, I would go so deep asleep, and I could just feel my body just going. It was like a furnace, like it was rebuilding itself on the spot. And I was like, well, and a lot of people, that was a part of the simplifying, was taking the time to just do that instead of thinking, oh, I'm done with the workout, I got to go do something else right now. To take that nap. Yeah, so I had this amazing ability to recover, and partly it was because I could sleep, and partly I think I could sleep because, like I said, when I was done with my training, I wasn't obsessing and mulling over all the different scenarios and other people and all that. So when I went to bed at night, I was just quiet. People are like, I get to bed and I'm like, my mind's going and I just can't shut it off, and I'm thinking about this and that and the other thing and that other guy and that other gal and other thing and other thing. And I'm like, dude, I love sleeping too much. I love sleeping too much to be thinking about shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to get ahead with that for sure. When did you start incorporating some lifting? Because you mentioned to me earlier that you went for a chunk of your career without lifting.
Yeah, it happened. I was 33 and a half. And the story sort of starts there. the last day of winter as a 33-year-old, I went out for a long ride, and I was not in the mood, and I was doing it by myself, and I was fighting it and resisting it. You know, the little voice was trying to tell me something, and I didn't listen. And I got 15 miles into the bike ride, and a pickup truck slammed into me, almost went under the truck, almost got ran over, broke my collarbone. And so and so now I'm looking at like basically almost 6 weeks without any real significant training. And all my competitors, you know, you have to understand what you do in sort of like that February, March, April, May window lays the base of fitness that you will need to then in August and September build up to Ironman.
Yeah.
And if you miss that spring chunk, it's very hard to make it up later. But anyway, shortly after that healed, I had seen that my swimming, cycling, and running wasn't bringing me the strength that I had gained in previous years. Like I just didn't have the speed, the snap, the resiliency, the strength climbing, or the recovery rate. And I knew it was muscular. And so I was introduced to a woman, Diane Bukta, who was like an encyclopedia of strength training. And she took me through that. Once I was recovered from that, we started doing strength work, and she took me through it was kind of a half season that year, but then the next year, as a 34 and then on into 35, full season of training where we'd do different phases and, you know, build up and build down and all that kind of stuff, and some maintenance stuff. And those 2 years were for sure the best years that I ever had. And I made massive jump in my performance again through that strength training. And part of the reason I didn't do it before is because I had no idea what to do. You know, I wasn't involved with the strength community. So, you know, I'd walk into the Gold's Gym near my house, and I'd walk in and I'd look at the dudes in there, like just throwing massive weights around, and I'd look at me and it was totally intimidating, you know, and here I am, Ironman champ, intimidated to actually work out with these guys. And I'm like, whoa, you know. Fortunately, she was like my second mom, you know. She just like, get in there and we're going to do it, you know. And she really educated me on not only what to do, but how to do it so that, one, I didn't get injured. You know, she was such a stickler for lifting form, which, you know, obviously is important. It's not how much you can lift. It's like how much you can lift with good form. And then making it, again, going back to my consistentism, making it so that it's building strength, but doing it consistently. So it's not like loading it all up and all of a sudden, you know, your muscles can't recover. And so anyway, those 2 years after I really had full seasons of doing it was just like mind blowing. And I wish I had started earlier because I know it would have helped me out. And that's definitely something that is a big part of my consistency program nowadays as a 65-year-old. You know, without fail, I'm doing the strength training. And a lot of triathletes ask me, they go, well, it's only like, we have 2 days a week. And if I have to skip a workout, should I be skipping those or what? And I'm like, no, those are two of your most very key workouts each week, especially as a 45-year-old or a 53-year-old or a 63-year-old. And I mean, you guys know all the research, you know, once guys get older and their testosterone can start to drop, or women go through menopause, you know, strength training is so key to maintaining your body's balance and your body's ability to balance. And, you know, as I was mentioning to you before the podcast here, my strength training was very traditional, you know, like isolated movements and not a lot of compound stuff. And nowadays it's like so much better, you know, with compound moves and balance moves and functional strength moves and focus on core and everything like that. Yeah, if I had the knowledge that I have now even and had it way back then, hell, I probably would have won like 12 of those damn things.
Yeah. So you felt it kept your body more resilient in those last few years?
Oh, absolutely. There's no way I would have had the results that I had or the consistency that I had without it.
We talked to countless professionals on the podcast about the importance of having strong feet, and chances are that wearing narrow toe box shoes has weakened your feet and your toes don't function the way they should.
Sucks, bro.
Yeah, that's why we've partnered with Peluva, and they're the first casual, wide toe box 5-finger shoe that you can wear running in the gym, literally anywhere. But the benefit of these shoes is that as you stick your feet in and your little toesy woesies start to get a little bit of spacey waisies,
Gets
your
me every
feet
time.
will start to function the way they should, because your toes will slowly start to widen out and your feet will no longer be this blobby little cast that they probably are right now. Andrew, how can they get them?
Yeah, time to spread them cheeks. I mean toes. Head over to peluva.com/power project. That's PELUVA.com/power project. And at checkout, enter promo code power project 15 to save 15% off. Again, that's at peluva.com/power project. Links in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
They got tons of them. Check them out. How about running? So we'll get more into that, but I think a lot of people are probably wondering where to start with running mechanics, because like you would think that you just go out and run, but people are like, oh gosh, my knees hurt after a small half mile run, or my feet hurt after a small half mile run. So where should people like build their blocks if they're like, I want to get into running a few miles?
That's a great question. The first thing, I mean, and Mark and I were talking about it earlier, is you need to take a video of yourself from the side and look at how your foot is making contact with the ground. The first thing you need to make sure is that you're running safely. And that's the number one. Are you at risk based upon the way your natural stride? Are you at risk of getting hurt? And you know what's interesting is that children, and I'm talking about 6, 7, 8-year-olds, they have beautiful running form. But when they get into middle school, they think that in order to run fast, they've got to lengthen their stride. And what happens is that they then create the biomechanics where they now are overstriding, where the ankle bone, when it makes contact, the foot makes contact with the ground, the ankle bone is in front of the knee bone. And unfortunately, when that happens, you are actually slowing yourself down until the ankle is now perpendicular with the knee. And now after that occurs, you're creating forward momentum. The problem with the ankle in front of the knee is now you're jamming the ankle, the knee, and the hip at foot contact. And there's a risk of injury, a high risk of injury. And so a lot of times what people need to be aware of is that they're at risk. The question is what do they do about it? And luckily with the internet, there's plenty of options on that. But the quickest thing is you have to realize that speed is based upon two things, not just stride length, but it's also based upon your stride frequency, the number of steps that you take per minute. I would encourage people to get an app, a metronome app, and listen to the sound and tune it up to 160 to 180 steps in a minute and make foot strike each of those times you hear that beat. And that speeding up the steps per minute will force you into a shorter stride, but maintain the same velocity. And so what you have to do is you have to, number one, make sure you're running safe. Now with Mark, he was running earlier, he was heel striking, but he wasn't overstriding. So if he was heel striking the entire time, which he didn't, eventually after he got warmed up, he was landing more on the ball of his foot. But if he ran that way and it was safe, because he's not trying to be a competitive runner, he's not trying to become a specialist, he just wants to use running to help his fitness, I wouldn't work on his technique. Not a whole lot, because there's too many other higher value targets for me to chase. And so for him, what I want him to focus on, not speed, not strength, not his power output. Let's build your foundation. And a lot of people skip their foundation. They want to get to the juice. It's the same thing. I want to lift heavy. And they don't want to spend time working the PVC pipe. Same thing in running. People want to run fast because there's immediate satisfaction. There's immediate results. Unfortunately, they peak out and they stall or they get hurt. You have to build the foundation. So when we talked, I said, what I want you to be able to do is 20 minutes of running at a very easy, controlled speed. And once you do that, we can now work on your gears.
I tried to kill Jason Kalipa one time in a workout, I'll admit. I had him doing some deadlifting, and I had him deadlift against some bands. And I had him do like a high rep set, like a set that lasted for a minute straight. And it's just really taxing. Like there's trying to lift against a band, there's like kind of nowhere to hide. You have to kind of produce a certain amount of force on every rep. So after a minute's time, I mean, he got just completely annihilated. And I was like, this is awesome. Like, I got him. I actually ended up taking a picture because like he's like laying face down on the ground and I stood over him like flexed, just like messing around.
Of course you did.
But Jason does like a couple, I put him through a couple sets and he just has his hands on his knees for a second. And then his color starts to cut because he was kind of turning pretty pale. His color starts to come back and he just stands up and he's like, all right, what's next? I'm like, holy shit. So what have you seen? Like, I thought I killed him for sure, but he was fine. He was just kind of gassed for a moment, but he came back super quick. What have you seen that aerobic capacity really be able to assist people with that maybe people are missing, maybe people don't understand? Because I believe that if you can recover from your workouts better, and if you have better conditioning, to a certain extent, it can be really massively helpful for any sport that you do, not just with runners and triathletes and stuff.
Yeah, so a lot of people misunderstand aerobic capacity and the value. People think aerobic capacity, they think, endurance, they think like running, cycling, rowing. But what we're talking really about is movement. We're talking about movement. There's no different if we're defining movement as running versus movement doing push-ups. There's no difference. So if we talk about you guys in the audience and we talk about the movement, not running, but let's talk about push-ups. And let me ask you, what is preventing you? Let's just think about the number of push-ups that you can do unbroken. How many can you do unbroken? And let's say you both have a goal of doing 10 more. What is preventing you from doing 10 more? You have to tell me. I'm your coach. And here's the beauty of being a coach. Once you tell me what is your weakness, I could put the stimulus attacking that weakness, and with good nutrition, good recovery, we're going to create an adaptation and fixing that weakness. That's how easy it is. But you have to tell me, and unfortunately, it's very difficult for people to identify the weakness. And the weakness usually falls in two main categories. They lack strength, right? Or they just get fatigued. They get tired. They're weak in terms of the recovery. They're weak in terms of their aerobic system. Remember, one of the major measures of aerobic fitness is how fast can you recover. So is your limitation in the movement of doing more reps because of fatigue? And so if it is, then what should I do? Should I have you do more heavy bench press? Or should what I do is have you do a high intensity effort like a running sprint? We're going to do max reps of push-ups for a short amount of time, maximize the creation of fatigue through high force push-ups. We can even do high force bench press, lightweight, high velocity. And then what we're going to do after a short amount of time, like we would do a 100-meter sprint, maybe 12, 15 seconds worth, we're going to rack it. Or if we're doing regular push-ups, we'll flip over on our back and we're going to do very slow, active recovery, floor presses, or bench press with the PVC pipe. The purpose on the first part is high intensity, create fatigue. The second part is active recovery, clear fatigue. Now, we would do the active recovery portion for the remainder of the minute. We would do a total of 5 rounds, a total of 5 minutes, 12 to 15 seconds high intensity. The remainder of the minute is recovery. And now what we're doing is, instead of breaking up push-ups to get better at push-ups and resting, right? Remember, if you put a stimulus of rest on the body, you get good at resting. What we're doing is actually making you move, but call it recovery. Not many people have done 5 minutes of unbroken push-ups. So what we're doing, though, is we're changing the focus not on the intensity side of the equation, but on the recovery. And what we're doing is focusing on the recovery. Why? Because that is what's preventing you from reaching your goal. That's aerobic capacity.
What you're pointing out, kind of leads me to believe, or at least think halfway, that maybe it doesn't matter too much about your foot striking if you're new to running,
and safe, not an overstride, right?
Right, and maybe that's not like someone's main concern. What do you think is maybe the main concern with somebody taking up running that hasn't really practiced it before?
The number one thing, we've got to be careful of that high intensity work. I mean, we've talked about this. That high intensity is really, it's one of the things that entices people in, because you see dramatic improvement right away in every study that you see. And it doesn't matter if you're an entry-level runner, a recreational experienced runner or an advanced runner with a past, you're going to see immediate results right away. If you get back in immediate, the problem is that it's a dead end situation. You're going to eventually plateau, and now you're stuck. You've essentially spent 12 weeks doing high intensity work, yet you have no foundation. At what point in time are you going to roll back the clock and actually run slow? And the problem is that people don't want to do that because you've been running fast this whole time. Now you're telling me that I want to go slow?
I can't brag about my times.
Exactly.
All right.
So that's why people don't ever go back. That's why today I kept telling you, there's going to be plenty of time for you to suffer. Enjoy the initial phases of this. It's going to be easy. You're never going to suffer. You walk whenever you want to walk. It doesn't matter to me. Your focus is time. What we're trying to do is build stamina first. We build stamina first. We create the foundation. Then what we want to do is we want to put the high intensity in to build our VO2 max. VO2 max is our ceiling. So think of it as this. Mount Everest is the peak. There's your VO2. We do high intensity work to develop our peak, but we also have to have a huge foundation. And that's what you're doing right now, Mark. You're building that. In between here is our maximum sustainable pace. We talked about it, the death zone in Everest, 26,000 feet. That's our lactate threshold, our maximum sustainable intensity. That intensity is a relationship between our VO2, our speed, and our base, our recovery, our anaerobic, our aerobic, fast twitch, slow twitch. It's a relationship in between. That's why when we were talking about earlier, which one's your weakness? Is it your speed? Is it your strength, your power, or is it your recovery? Your maximum sustainable pace is a relationship between the two of those. And which one's your weakness? So what we do is we develop the floor, we develop the ceiling, and now this middle piece that can improve your entire life. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, old or young, you can always improve it, but you got to maintain your ceiling and your base. And that's the problem. Most people just have a good ceiling.
Outside of really good nutrition, because we're probably going to try to talk about the nutrition piece at some point, you were mentioning how the assault bike is something that you'd have athletes use to clear lactate post-workout. What are some other recovery methods that you think would be pretty solid for athletes, like, say, jiu-jitsu athletes or CrossFitters, et cetera? What are, like, even in and outside of the gym?
So the problem that I run into all the time is we have a bunch of different recovery protocols that we can use, but are you going to do it? And I think about that for myself as an athlete. I think that if I walked into a gym and wanted to join a gym and they said, well, what's your goal? And I'm like, oh, I want to run a better marathon. Well, they'd talk to me about nutrition. They'd talk to me about, different recovery protocols and range of motion. And I would just hear noise. I don't care about that. I just want to get faster. How are you going to make me faster? And so that's a real problem that I see all the time, is that people do not respect the importance of different recovery protocols. Like, I'm going to give you an example. Frazier was at the Olympic Training Center for weightlifting, and he broke his back, and it was his big dream. And when he broke his back, he was told to leave, pack your bags and go. It was overnight ended. And the thing is that he didn't respect the opportunity back then. Like, he was not getting up good warm-ups in, he was lifting hurt, and it ended the career. It is very rare for an athlete to get a second chance. And when he got into the sport of CrossFit, he didn't make that same mistake. One of the things that he did was he created a recovery protocol, and he maintained it. And as he got more famous, more popular because of his success, he took advantage of that, getting Normatec boots, getting the Therabody massage pieces, and all the rolling. He created his own protocol based upon the movements that he was doing, and he did it religiously. And that's why he was so successful, is that he was able to maintain that volume and that intensity for all of those years because he wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. And the problem that I see is that we now have, with technology, a lot of different options. And I do like the Normatec boots. I do like the Therabody products. I do. I also like the rolling out piece as post-recovery protocols. But if you make it too complicated, too time-consuming, no one will do it. And so a lot of times, you know what I'll do? My number one thing is, I'll put the Normatec boots on because I could sit and watch TV and it doesn't hurt. And I can do that. You want to ask me how often I roll in the last year? Probably twice, only because my IT band hurt so bad I couldn't run. So it's the key is developing these rituals that are doable. Like when we talked about, if you're doing an interval and you get 10 seconds of rest, what are you doing in 10 seconds? If you get a 30-second rest, what are you doing? A minute. You should develop all of these protocols so that they're habits like your warm-up protocols. The hardest thing I think for people is that post-workout recovery. That's really a difficult piece.
Got it.
I find it a lot of times when people are leaning that hard into so many different recovery pieces, I'm always kind of questioning their training in the first place. Some of the people that you're mentioning, I mean, you're mentioning some people that are at a really high level, so of course they have to take care of themselves with those things. But sometimes I hear people, talking about all these different recovery methods. I'm just like kind of wondering, like, what's your training like? I think maybe you're overdoing something there, and that's why this hurts and that hurts all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think back on my triathlon days. I swam 25,000 meters a week. I ran 40 to 50 a week, and I rode 300 to 400 a week for 8 years. And, when you do all of that, the last thing that you do is actually want to do another workout, which is recovery. But that unfortunately would end my career. I couldn't get my right side to work with my left side. It was so messed up that I would literally walk in a circle if I closed my eyes because my left side wouldn't work as well as my right. I was so damaged. And I just thought that was the way it was.
What caused it?
Just overuse. And part of it was like, you think you're doing the sport of triathlons and it's like, I must be working all of my muscles. But in fact, you're not. You're just actually doing the same thing over and over. And there are significant muscle groups that are being neglected and underdeveloped. And that's where your injury occurs. So now you're 8 years in. Imagine the development of the muscles that were doing all of that work. Well, imagine the opposite of that. Those have atrophied and gone away. And now what do? You're just stuck. And that's where I was. So when I left the sport at 28 years old, I was broken. I couldn't get down a flight of stairs, but I could make myself do an Ironman. I could make myself do it. I could make myself, we talked about this. I said to myself after my last Ironman, I could do 7 of these in a row, but I couldn't get down a flight of stairs. And so part of it is like, I just thought that's the way it was. And it wasn't that I felt bad about it. It was just, that's the price. And so I went through my 30s and full-time job and just more and more crippled. The moving sidewalks in airports, there's a reason why you stand on those things and ride it, because you can't walk down them. That was me. And so I ran into Annie Sakamoto, one of the original CrossFit girls, in 2007. And she invited me to the original CrossFit gym, Santa Cruz Central. Glassman was. And eventually I worked up the courage to go in there. And she told me, she says, you've done a lot of volume in your days. A lot. But it's the same movements over and over again. You do CrossFit. Focus on the neglected muscle groups, and I guarantee you'll become functional movements. And that to me resonated. And that's when I decided to start. It was 2008. I decided to take the hour drive because I thought it was only one gym. And I went in and, boy, that was a bad day though.
Power Project family, we talk about eating meat all the time on this podcast. Pause. But sometimes you might want to eat some different meat. Pause. You might want to eat duck, chicken, Japanese A5 Wagyu. You might want to change things up. That's why we've partnered with Good Life Proteins, which also has certified Piedmontese beef on their website. Now, all you have to do is head to goodlifeproteins.com and you can select Build a Box with all of the proteins that you want. Then you'll select Subscribe and Save to save money on all of your meat. Pause. Enter code POWERPROJECT to save an extra 5% on any subscription you select. So if you want to get your beef every 2 weeks, you'll be able to save 25% on all of your meat. Again, that's goodlifeproteins.com. Links are in the description along with the podcast show notes. And you think, not even think, but as far as lifting, you said lifting heavy. What do you mean by lifting heavy?
I think that they should be doing not 1 rep lifts, but 3 rep, 5 rep lifts. Okay. Yeah, and working on power output, strength, explosivity. I think that doing Olympic lifts, I think doing back squats, deadlifts. There's a very famous story, and not sure if it's true. Edwin Moses back in the 80s was the most dominant hurdler, I think he had 186 world-class wins in a row.
Mm.
The World Championships was in Berlin, and underneath the Olympic Stadium in Berlin, where they had the Olympics in 36, there is another track. And he brought 405 pounds of weight and a rack. And in that morning, before running finals, he was back squatting 405. And people are like, what the heck is this? And part of it is that he used the back squat to do it 6 to 8 hours before his competition to create an activation of all those fast twitch fibers that are going to be needed to be used in the 400. People thought it was just intimidation, but he was back squatting 405 back in the 80s.
Yeah.
And he would travel with this.
Mm-hmm.
That's legit for a runner.
Mm-hmm.
That's wild. I heard similar stories about Ben Johnson. He used to squat X amount of hours before his sprints.
Yeah, for an activation.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is like, I've played around with that too. Like I do like back squatting or deadlifting because you can actually feel the engagements of those muscles when you do actually lift. And even a day before, you can feel it. And so, yeah, I don't know if something's there. Part of it is that I do a lot of experimentation on people, like games athletes. The reason why I don't charge them is because I experiment on them. And then the things that work, I release to the public. The things that don't, we just keep quiet. Like, you want to hear something that didn't work?
You know, you multiple times you've mentioned the way your body's changed as you started running more, like from the beginning till now. And even though you were a football player, you were a receiver, meaning you were running a lot. How did your body change as you started to run more and increase your frequency with running? Because I still find it shocking that you did Murph for 30 days and survived that.
Yeah.
You know, so how much more change did you get? Like, what are you noticing?
I think one, as I've kind of like stepped into wellness more, I've like tried to just like understand the body better, right? And I think there's a mixture of like, obviously my base now, like when I can still go play football right now, it would be a little bit of a different stimulus for me though. Like I would probably need a day to throw on the cleats and like do more change of direction.
Yeah. I
know that I'm not working those muscles as much. But I think a lot of my base from football, a lot of the speed and agility, a lot of the fast twitch muscle fibers, though that part of my training and lifestyle before has really helped in this sport where it's a lot more slow twitch. It's just your ability to get off the ground, kind of bounding off one foot to another. But I think the biggest change I've seen is just, one, to your point of my lower trunk.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of my muscle is now. Because I live on the sled, going forward, backward, side to side, and just finding different ways to train the lower body. A lot of my muscle is now in the legs, where before I was way beefier up top. Like I would be able to bench like 225, like probably for like 10, 15 reps. Where now it's like I'm just not able to tolerate that much strength as much. But I think the biggest change has been in my legs.
Yeah.
And as much, they've gotten a lot more durable. And through the ultras I've done, through the marathons I've done, it's really helped me just kind of like well round my whole system.
Yeah.
So that's probably the biggest thing.
You've done ultras?
I've done a 50K, 50 miler, and a 100 miler.
Damn. People need to address working on their strength because a lot of people, they fall in love with running, which is awesome. That's great. They fall in love with some sort of movement. But I think if you want to get better at it and you have symptoms, like you're in pain, I love a lot of what you're saying. Like that's wild that you can go out and play football. Like these are goals that people should have. And I know you're still young, but how cool would that be if you're my age and you can still say that, like, yeah, I would need a couple weeks to train, but I could still go out and play some football. I could still go out and get open against a 25-year-old guy trying to cover me or something. Like, that's sick. I think that's really cool. And it's a really great goal. But for people to stay healthy, I think they're looking for the magic. And we talk a lot about sleep and food, and there's tons of stuff. But don't forget about how powerful it can be just to help yourself to get a little bit stronger. And it doesn't require, I love lifting weights. I know that you love lifting weights. We spend a lot of time doing it, but I honestly think people could spend 2 or 3 hours a week, maybe even a little bit less than that.
Yeah.
You probably get away with a little less than that, and maybe not a lot of it's even gym time.
Yeah.
Could just be some dumbbells, could just be a kettlebell, could be body weight exercises. But you'd be shocked at what you can get from some strength training. It can go a really long way.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I think the mantra in the running world has always been, just run more. Like instead of cross training, if you take that extra 60 minutes, could you just get better if you ran more or did more cardio, right? And I think it is one of those mentalities where nowadays there's so much research behind it.
Yeah.
You're seeing elite athletes, and Kipchoge, I think, is a great example of someone who still does strength training. And it might be at a low level where it's like maybe just working through range of motion, doing mini band work, really working on the small muscles, but he's doing something. And there's definitely a translation of strength in the weight room then to go translate that into your activity or your sport. And I think it's the way you're training in the gym. Right? Because if you don't need to be doing Olympic lifts if you're a runner, but there's a lot of movements in the gym that simulate running, whether it's step ups or step downs or lunging or what's it called, bear crawls. There's a lot of different ways to create the same angles that you're trying to create in running in the gym. And I guess for me, it's like, I'm so used to it. Like, and I guess that's kind of been my world, right? Because I've always been around like football, and like there's strength and speed and agility in football. You go in the weight room and then we'll come on the field and we're gonna do specific receiver stuff and just change of direction drills in general. So I've always lived in that world of being able to do both. So now when I got into running, I'm like, well, it makes total sense to keep lifting. Why would I just completely stop lifting and just only commit to running, where I think there's a benefit to really doing both? And I think for most people, it's a lack of education for it, right? But it doesn't have to be so complex. Everyone nowadays, they see all these things on Instagram, on social media where, oh my God, this guy's doing this crazy type of lunge or this crazy deadlift, where in reality, if you can hinge, if you can squat, if you can split lunge and do some plyometrics and do single leg exercises, those 5 things will cover a lot of the basis for running. And you don't have to do barbells either. You can just do body weight or simply pick up some dumbbells.
And people will kind of say, yeah, but I have shin splints. And it's like, again, if you just took a moment and got off your feet and went into a gym and did some bent over rows or seated rows or dumbbell presses, worked on your shoulders, worked on other areas of your body, not only is that working on building muscle mass potentially in another area, but don't forget, it's also getting you away from the thing that you love doing that's actually kind of giving you more damage to those particular areas. And
it's like you said earlier, right? Like typically for growth, you have to go through some pain, right? Soft tissue sucks. Soft tissue hurts. And that's for most people, they need to sprinkle in a little bit more soft tissue and a little bit more strength. Those 2 pieces, in addition to running, you can create a beast runner. But like a lot of people don't do soft tissue either. It's like, I've realized that a lot of the people in
Can you
the
explain
running
what
world,
soft tissue stuff
soft
is?
tissue is just like foam rolling, myofascial release. It could be with a lacrosse ball. It could be with a foam roller. It could be what I'm doing with this little blue thing right now, where I'm really putting a lot of pressure deep down into the fascia of my foot. But you know, the old mantra of stretch more when you're hurt or put ice on that injury is just so old school, and it's been so proven that it doesn't work. It actually restricts more blood flow. And I think if anyone takes anything from this pod, it's understand that your body wants to create blood flow for it to recover. And the more you can do that in a soft tissue environment where pretty much you can watch TV, do your leisure activities, but just incorporate this little piece into your lifestyle. And I think that's where a lot of my ability to stay healthy has been the hours where I'm not running and the hours where I'm not in the gym. When I'm standing at home in my office, I'm standing just like this. I have some form of a roller, a slant board, a balance tool, something where I'm stimulating my body even as I just stand here. And I think when I'm watching TV, I'll sit in the couch stretch and just work on my flexion all day, or I'll get in boots, or I'll do some form of myofascial release, where the secret is in the other 22 hours of the day, not the 2 hours you're in the gym or running. But most people want the answers for those 2 hours, where in reality, it's everything else that you're doing in your lifestyle.
You can fix your own pain. It's an unbelievable thing. If you work on some of the myofascial release, and Nsima just grabbed this, what is this thing called? Roller 8 or something like that?
Roll recovery, I think.
It's on there.
Roll recovery. This device is amazing. It's kind of like a vice. You can put your forearm in there, your arm in there, or your shin, or your
quad,
leg. And you can work your hamstrings, your legs, your calves, your shins. There's a lot of great products out there on the market. You can also just get a lacrosse ball, a softball. You can get these inexpensive things, and these are things. It's kind of amazing that you can heal yourself. You can just put a ball in the ground and literally just squish your foot on that ball, and you'll get so much relief and so much decompression of the feet that you will kind of be in disbelief of how great that will make you feel, and how much just congestion you can get rid of for yourself. And then you can hire someone to help you with these things, and that can be great. I do both. I have someone that comes and tries to work on me almost every week. But in addition to that, probably I don't know, an hour every day is spent doing some sort of myofascial release / mobility stuff.
It's a liberating thing too.
Yeah.
If you're able to your point, heal yourself, because most people don't have the capacity or the money to actually pay for a deep tissue masseuse, or to pay to get physical therapy, or to pay to get dry needling done. The liberating feeling of having a foam roller or just a lacrosse ball, which costs less than $15, that feeling of like, oh shoot, I feel good. I feel recovered and ready to go attack this next workout or the next run. It is something I think for most people, like it's a rewarding feeling.
Mm-hmm. One thing I've noticed is like when it comes to stuff like rolling, a few years ago, it started getting kind of a bad rep, and there were a few people saying, oh, it doesn't make that big of a difference. You don't need to spend as much time doing that. But like one thing that we've noticed is that we have a habit every day. Like every single morning I wake up, I have a hard roller at home. I'll roll my back, quads, everything on that. I use this thing while sitting down. That's why I really like this. Mark introduced me to this thing. So you can be sitting on the couch, you can just be standing, and you can be smashing your quads and everything with it. But with like jujitsu and all the movement stuff that I do, that has been a huge habit, and I don't get as much body work done from like a PT as Mark does. But like you mentioned, I think it's huge to understand that you don't need to see someone to get the benefit of all of this type of stuff.
You don't really have much restriction either. Like I was showing you something. I was like, I got a lot of like crazy tension right here with when I sit on this this like medicine ball that we had in the gym, and you're like, yeah. I was like, I got like a little bit. So again, it's all like symptom related. Like if you have symptoms and shit hurts, you're gonna have to spend more time on it. Yeah. If you don't have symptoms and you don't feel like it's a limiting thing, it's probably something you can spend a lot less time on.
What's the difference in your foot strike when you're using those different shoes on runs? Because like one thing I noticed is you gifted me one of those ultra super shoes, right? And the first run I did with you, and I'm like, I can like heel strike right now without feeling any type of impact up my body. But if I try to heel strike with Vivo's dog, it's like, you know what I mean? So like, what's the difference for you? And what have you noticed when you're trying to run in those different shoes?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, especially coming from the marathon, because I was wearing the Alpha Flies, right? The freaking super shoe. And in the videos, like my brother took a ton of video, and you can see my foot. It's kind of mid striking. It's closer to heel striking though, because of how cushioned the shoe is, and with the beveled edge, right? It almost forces your foot that way.
Yeah.
You can try to stay so heavy on the forefoot, but then you're not really using the energy return of the shoe, right? The goal of that shoe is that it gives you a little bit of propulsion forward. So even when you're midfoot to almost closer to heel striking, you'll still have that like, oh shoot, I'm still able to push forward, versus when I'm in even like a Nike Pegasus shoe that has less cushion, that has doesn't have the carbon fiber plate, I have to focus more on like, all right, stay on the midfoot and kind of keep that repetitive strike. So now I wouldn't say I forefoot strike as much. I'm probably more in that midfoot, right where it's very efficient for my pattern. And I think that's also been an adaptation for me, where it's like finding that middle ground of like not being so forefoot like a sprinter, but also not heel striking like you're walking, right? Because we talked about it, like walking versus jogging versus running versus sprinting are 4 different movements. And each movement requires a different level of mechanics. And that's kind of like that running and jogging space. You have to find out like what's the most efficient pattern for you. Because like my coach heel strikes, and he's a runner that's like a sub 220 guy. He's also a $140. So he's a smaller runner. He's been a runner his whole life. But at this point, it would be stupid for him to change his whole mechanic. He's already learned that pattern. And there's plenty of Olympic runners that also heel strike, right? Yeah. You could look at Kipchoge, but then look at guys that are coming in at like maybe 8th or 9th or 10th place. They might be heel striking. So it's less of like what's better or what's worse. It's more what's better for you. And what can your body handle over a long period of time for a marathon or whatever distance you're trying to go.
So even though so many people have different forms of striking at the highest level, there's nothing in your mind where you think in the long run, this would be the best way to learn how to run. Because like everybody has different body types. And for someone who's much lighter, a heel strike won't send as much impact up the body. But when you're heavier, I wonder, is there some type of foot strike that you'd want to try to learn or lean towards for your longevity within running? I don't know that, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts.
I would say for most people, if you could midfoot strike, that's probably the most sustainable,
Okay.
Like, just like, I think very simply, like, even if you look at the data, like, there's a lot of books on like the science of running where they test different runners of like this percentage of runners for a marathon, forefoot striked, midfoot striked, heel striked. The time differences aren't very much, but they noticed that a lot of the forefoot and midfoot strikers were the leaders of the pack. They were the closer to winning the actual race.
Yeah.
And not saying that the heel strikers weren't, because there was a couple of them probably that were in like the top 10% echelon, but they noticed that more runners were midfoot or forefoot strikers that performed better. So I think in my train of thought is, if you can develop a midfoot strike, it's a sustainable running mechanic. And if you can do that over a long period of time, you can start to really get faster and own that position.
And some of these things might matter a little bit less when you're starting out because you're just moving slower.
Exactly.
Or at least you should be moving slower because you should be taking your time and you're not producing as much force. So it should be wreaking less havoc on your body. And so it would be a good idea at that time while you're moving slower to get yourself to strike in a place that feels good for you, that feels right for you. Some of the argument with a heel strike is interesting. I've heard people just say that for some people that do heel strike, they're maybe just taking less overall steps because they might end up having a longer stride for themselves, not a longer stride in comparison to somebody else. That's interesting. The cadence stuff is interesting where people talk about 180 steps, per minute. Have you messed with that at all or found that to be anything beneficial to you? Or?
I've done some like research in addition to like testing on myself where I would like literally, I'd look at my watch, I'd be like, all right, 60 seconds. Let me count every single step. And just to see on an easy run versus when I'm doing like a speed play, like a fartlek workout, do I get the same amount of steps in? And typically on easy runs, I would average at like 80 to 85 steps because naturally you're not going as fast, but you still want to be able to get that amount of steps in that same 60 seconds, whether you're going fast as hell or on an easy run. So then I would just track it like, all right, now I'm going to go at my speed play and I would get closer to 90, but it was about 5 off. And I think that's okay actually, because even on an easy effort, if you're able to create that many steps, which basically just means you're putting your foot on the ground, right? Because to get faster, you got to drive off the ground. It's less of you just picking up your knee. It's the push off the ground, right? So if you're able to create those same amount of steps, that same cadence, whether you're running at 9-minute pace or 6-minute pace, it means that you have a good understanding of your cadence as a human. So I think you should test it. It honestly gets a little bit crazy because you could look at watches, but typically watches are a little bit off. They'll tell you like, oh, 168, 169, 171, whatever it is. But I would just take a minute, time yourself, count each step, and then just do the math yourself. But I've noticed I haven't dove too deep into that stuff though.
But it probably is just an indication that you are springy, right? If you're getting in the proper amount of steps.
Exactly. Which I think is a great thing for running.
Moving slower and just heavier.
Most people, the injury happens when they're spending too much time on the ground between each footstep. And like that was one of the main principles in Born to Run, where it's like you want to spend as little time on the ground because the less time you're on the ground, which basically means you're elastic, right? You're able, right? So versus someone who's like this, like, and each step, because you think about how much pressure is absorbing in that one foot. It's typically 180 plus pounds of weight on one foot. The longer you spend there, the more chance of injury happening. So you want to be bouncy. You want to be elastic in your foot and your Achilles level.
I think as you go over like an 80% range, I think we should shift into like talking a lot about lifting right now, and then we can kind of go back into some of these other things. It's okay if we go a little all over, but I'd love to focus on lifting since both of you guys have a prowess with lifting as well. What happens when people start to go over 85% with lifting is the percentage of time that they actually do that lifting is reduced significantly. So somebody going over 80%, it starts to get in like the 20% range that somebody would perform 85% of their 1 rep max and so forth as you go higher and higher. I think that people don't really understand all that well. And I'm talking even about like not warm-up sets, but like working sets. But I think with running and with lifting, I think that people don't really understand how much can be accomplished with probably around 60% to probably right close to that 80 to 85% range. Like there is a lot of improvement that you can make. And if you're new to lifting or if you're new to running, you can hang out there for a long time and lift very safely and make great amounts of progress. What do you guys think about that?
Well, that's the whole Wildnet system is based off that exact premise. And it's like you do your functional stuff, maybe the lower end of that range. And then we do a lot of stuff right at that 85% door, because progressive overload still applies at 85%. You don't need to do 99% max every time to put weight on the bar. You know what I mean? Progress is progress. But one thing we see also is, in addition to that, hanging out in that range also allows you to train multiple methodologies simultaneously and still see gains across. Because the general wisdom is that, like, you can only, I mean, I don't subscribe to it, but for a long time people said you could only make progress in essentially like one physical capacity at a time, or maybe like a little bit of something else. Whereas I don't find that to be true at all, particularly if you're setting up like a symbiotic system where one thing supports the next. You know, like I just did an Instagram post on like a study that shows that aerobic capacity, building aerobic capacity increases hypertrophy, strength output, and even fast twitch muscle. And it was kind of interesting because they literally they took a group, male and female, young, healthy, minimal resistance training background, and they had the entire everyone in the group for a 6 or 8 weeks cycle, a one-legged cycle with one leg. So they conditioned one leg aerobically while not conditioning the other at all. The other stayed as was. And then they had them do, I think, a 10-week block of resistance training after that. And then they took muscle biopsies throughout the entire process for both legs and measured all sorts of different things. And the gains in both hypertrophy, strength output, and fast twitch muscle fiber in the conditioned leg were greater because there were more capillaries per muscle fiber, greater transport of oxygen and nutrients, and you know what I mean? So it's like, I think it doesn't have to be one or the other. I think you can find a balance.
You personally found that it's not true that you can only gain in one area, probably because you are not overdoing it in one. I mean, maybe occasionally you overdo it here and there. We all do, right? You all go a little into the red, right? Yeah. But you're in a 75 to 85% range in a bunch of different things, and you're able to spread your disciplines around without feeling like you're able to recover from your workouts.
Pretty much, because just look at me objectively. I have no athletic background. I mean, I grew up bear hunting and I wrestled and stuff, but I'm just an inmate, you know. I've done inmate fitness stuff, nothing crazy. And as an ultra runner, I can deadlift triple my body weight. I can, you know what I mean? I can train functional strength. I'm still doing sparring and multiple martial arts disciplines and, you know, throughout this whole process. And like, I'm nothing special. I'm just someone who looked at this closely and wanted to find a way to balance these different capacities and develop them simultaneously. And am I going to out deadlift the guy who's, you know what I mean, putting 100% of his training into deadlifting and it has my same genetic size and dimensions and age? No, of course not. But I'm still getting consistently stronger. I'm 35, you know, just over 35.
Maybe if he's not in like a peak week, maybe you will catch him. You know what I mean?
You never know.
The way that those guys train sometimes.
Yeah, but it's like, shit, for an ultra marathon runner, I'll take triple my body weight for a deadlift and a, 300, whatever, you know what I mean, for bench, like, works for me.
I generally agree with the 85%, 60 to 85% range being the sweet spot for a lot of things. From a experiential point of view, know that I do a lot better with volume than I do intensity, lifting and running and every discipline. Whereas you've got people like Tom Martin in the UK who can deadlift over 90% 3 days a week. And still, I mean, he's always done that when he was up.
Is he a sumo puller?
No, he's not.
Didn't see that coming, did you? Oh, no.
Bigger CNS load.
No.
Oh, wow. That's a man. What's his name again?
What was it?
Tom Martin.
He's
Tom Martin.
He's unbelievable. He's got a background in sprinting, interestingly, and he does not look in any way like a sprinter.
And kind of doesn't even look like a great lifter, but he's a savage.
I'd love to see his
absolute savage.
He's actually gotten a lot bigger over the years. He didn't used to have this size.
So he's a great example he's the example I always use, because if I deadlift over 90% once in training, I then can't deadlift 80% from the floor for about 2.5 weeks.
Oh, really?
Well, and a lot of people won't recognize that about themselves. And I think it's really important. I think the other thing that's really important to observe is efficiency.
Yeah.
When somebody's really efficient and smooth, it doesn't matter what we're talking about. If they're efficient and smooth at wrestling or jiu-jitsu or running, lifting, they're going to be able to have a capacity to do that thing more.
That's it. And I think that's why execution is so important, and why I think so many people, when moving into a new area, coming from an area of competency in something else, assume that they will have the proficiency and efficiency to be able to execute that at a higher volume than they can perhaps tolerate. Which is why when you get lifters going into running and they work a little bit too hard, too fast, their gait, their positioning, their tendons, everything's not going to be in the right efficiency, consistency to be able to repeatedly do that thing without some exposure to potential for injury. Or higher levels of fatigue that then impact their lifting. And that's normally about the 4-week part, that 4-week point where lifters will go, oh, I can't do this. I'm just going to go back to lifting and abandon what they tried to do. So from our methodology's point of view, we will program low volume intensity over 85%, but then the vast majority of our work is done in the 60 to 85% range, whether it's lifting or whether it's running. And I think at this point, it's really important to mention from a running point of view, how much I encourage people to not work in arbitrary number ranges, because the 220 minus age as a heart rate metric is so vague.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
The challenge there is that it's a good starting point to give people a good way to work into a zone 2. But I think the best area to start with for people that are coming into running or coming to endurance training at all is the talk test or nasal breathing, which I know are two things that you bought into. But essentially, if you go on a run, you should be able to have a conversation with the person next to you, or you should be able to use nasal breathing as a form of throttle control more than anything else, rather than any of the sort of pertain benefits that are spoken about elsewhere. It is a throttle control. And then once you have the ability to run for 30 minutes, that's where we would recommend a lactate heart rate threshold test, because an LTHR test is 30 minutes max effort run, and you take the last 20 minutes average HR and average pace, and that gives you your threshold numbers to work with. So you have a pace and you have a heart rate zone to work in, and then zone 2 is 85 to 89% of that figure. And that is where we tend to do most of our work with our athletes. And you can even dip down into zone 1 because it's a slightly higher zone 2 than you might get with the MAF method or with 220 minus age. Because in trained individuals, they will often have a higher heart rate, and especially in trained individuals that are carrying a lot of muscle mass, because the shuffling of blood and oxygen around your body in terms of volume demand is so much higher that to make an arbitrary guess that actually we can apply the same formula that we'd apply to the recreational runner is not the way to approach things. So I think far too many people rely on the arbitrary number of 220 minus age as what their heart rate is, when that number was pulled out of thin air in reality. So the sooner people can get to the point where they have the ability to do a 30-minute max effort test and give themselves those metrics to work with, that's where the work can really start to become more specific in that range. And that's where I think a lot of mistakes are made, because people do the work in, it's like, to put it in a lifting context, it's like guessing your 1RM or basing your 1RM off a set of 8. If you did 200 pounds for a set of 8 and then assume that your top set was 315, you might actually just be very conditioned to volume rather than intensity. You might not be able to squat over 300.
And it's usually way off with someone who's like neurologically inefficient.
Exactly.
They don't have the ability to really tap into their nervous system really well.
Exactly, because it comes back to that efficiency point whereby top singles, top triples, these things come down to neurological efficiency. And at the other end of the spectrum, you can condition yourself to be very efficient with volume. So that's why I think in training, it's really important to have baseline metrics that you work from, rather than working arbitrarily within ranges that you think for the general populace might work, because it really hones in on making sure that the work you are doing is with intent, which is important across the board. But if you're trying to balance disciplines, it's essential. Otherwise, you're stabbing in the dark, and you might end up overspilling what you can recover from. And then you're doing minimal volume in 2 disciplines, overspilling your recovery, and therefore not adapting, which means that you'll be standing still rather than being sensible the way that you put things together. And I think efficiency is the name of the game across the board, because efficiency is just in terms of movement patterns is something we should strive for, but efficiency in terms of the combination of programming, adaptation, and recovery are the sort of the 3 things that ultimately underpin how we move forwards as athletes. And I think recovery as a buzzword in the industry has spiraled somewhat out of control. I think programming, people spend a lot longer than they need to on the finer details rather than just doing the basics really well. And adaptation is where looking at the finer details and isolating where the junk is, where the key sessions are, and what the intent of those sessions and how they are formulated to be. Those are the things that should be focused on, rather than the nuances of a lot of what I see online being spoken about in more detail than is required. And I'll be as bold as saying I think a lot of people spend too much time focusing on trying to make things perfect rather than just doing the work repeatedly over time.
180, isn't it 180 minus your age? I'm not sure if I have that correct.
That's the MAF tone. Right.
Aerobic threshold.
So 220 minus age is max heart rate.
Max heart rate. Okay.
Yeah. So that's the one that I find most people come to us saying that's what they've been working off. But I know that the MAF tone method is quite popular over here as well. But again, it's not arbitrary, because it's obviously based on data and statistics, but it is a number that is not specific to you. that you are then working from.
Power Project family, shut your fucking mouth. We've been talking about breathing through your nose and nasal breathing during your sleep for the past 5 years. That's why we've partnered with Hostage Tape. It's the best tape on the market, sticks to your face even if you have a beard. So head to hostagetape.com/Power Project and you'll be able to get a year's supply of tape for 55 cents a day. That shit saves you $150. It's a no-brainer. Links in the description and the podcast show notes. Enjoy the show.
This is for anybody. I know you guys noticed any difference with lifting before jujitsu or lifting before running? What do you guys prescribe to? What do you think? Like, or running first, or I don't know. What do you guys think?
General perspective from our end is, unless the lifting is entirely to support another sport, then the lifting should always be prioritized in the context of a day, because the degradation that comes from the fatigue of endurance training translated into lifting is significantly more than the other way around. Because if you think of running as effectively, again, let's talk within the context of heavier people with a lifting background here. If you're a heavier runner, every stride
is a repetition.
It's a repetition, yeah. And if you're doing loads and loads of repetition, imagine if you went the other way around to conventional lifting and you did a set of 100 at 60 kilos before you went and did your top single. That makes no sense.
Agreed.
So it's the same premise in reverse, whereby the quality emphasis that comes with the lower rep demand of lifting means that we would always recommend prioritizing that, with the caveat being, 2 caveats actually. The caveat being, unless the lifting is only there to support the priority sport of the person, in which case it's pure S&C that's there to support the endurance training, or within the context of somebody's week, from a practicality point of view, they can't lift first thing and they need to do their endurance training, because doing the training first and foremost is more important than worrying too much about the interference effect, which is something that has seemed to become a bit of a scapegoat as a phrase and a word online that people just throw out there to just justify
being lazy.
Yeah, well, and sometimes there's like some legitimacy to it. For example, and
it's an entirely legitimate thing.
You can also get a training benefit from it, but just as an example, so like a snatch it's a skillful lift, right? Like it's something that we can agree like has a level of skill involved with it. And if you were to do, bang out a bunch of push-ups and body weight squats beforehand, it would quote unquote retard your ability to perform the snatch well. Same thing with, you wouldn't really lift or ride a bike necessarily, stationary bike for 30 minutes and do intervals and stuff like that before you did gymnastics. Like, gymnastics is too high skill. However, when people do stuff like this, it disproves what we thought previously every single fucking time. So while it might mess up your coordination, and it might, let's even just say before you bench press, you do push-ups. Let's say you do 150 push-ups before you bench press every week. Over a period of time, there might be an adaptation that occurs where when you go back to regular bench pressing and you nix the push-ups, you might be stronger. So we see a lot of this stuff, but I think that that's where most people are coming from, is like they don't want it to mess up maybe the skill. And I was just curious on what your guys' take are on some of these things are.
I think the previous misconception with the interference effect is a thing. It's entirely legitimate. It exists, but I think the conventional understanding has been it's an on and an off switch, where it blunts mTOR or downregulates AMPK, and it means that therefore no adaptation can occur, and that simply isn't the case. I mean, if you look at the way that CrossFit Games athletes' training is put together, it just doesn't in any way lend itself to those that are shouting the loudest about the interference effect, because they put things together in a way that is getting the volume that they need to do within the context of the week done. And whilst yes, it means that maybe they haven't adapted as much as they would have done had they done that training session in isolation, they're still moving the needle forward slowly but surely. And I mean, the interference effect came from a study that effectively, I mean, the idea came from, there was a researcher who was a powerlifter, and he wanted to impress his research manager, who was Professor Holosi, who was a runner. So he started going on runs around the campus with him just to sort of get close to him and work his way up the corporate ladder of the academic setting. And he found that he was getting weaker. He was getting smaller and he was getting weaker because he wasn't taking certain things into account. And that made him fascinated about why this was the case. He had a discussion with Holosi, his research manager, and his first research exploration was in exactly this. And there were 3 groups. So there was A, B, and C. A was doing basically squatting and leg pressing 5x5 focus. B was doing running, focus, sort of a 30-minute, 40-minute hard effort run twice a week. And then C was doing both. So they're doing 100% of A and 100% of B, and they were doing that together. And then they found that the sort of point where fatigue really started to hit a point where numbers dropped was week 7. And that's where the findings of the study said interference occurred. And this is where all the research on the interference effect has since come from. But if you actually look at the context of the study, yes, it's opened up some fantastic questions and allows us to figure these things out for ourselves, as well as opening up new studies since as a meta-analysis. But the way the study was put together is the exact mistake that most people make when trying to do this for the first time, which is they take 100% of a running program, 100% of a lifting program, and go like that. And then suddenly wonder why after 2 weeks at 200% output, they're feeling beaten up.
And sometimes also, what about just convenience?
That's it, yeah.
You know, and the
that's
convenience, you know, goes into compliance. And if you can have the convenience to keep the compliance, then that's probably the best thing for you to do.
That's why the second caveat I gave is if somebody's work schedule means that they can't lift before they go to the track, then that's the case.
The most important thing.
A sustainable athlete is the better athlete.
That's where you got to start with most people.
Yeah, if you can't get to training, but also not just that. It's like a lot of the guys, like our system was developed with primarily tactical athletes and combat athletes, so people who fight, right? So that going back, that skill acquisition, when that's a priority, not too different with any sport. You want to do like same thing. We want to lift before we do our long endurance training, right? But the reason will be different. Like the technical, that blade, my point being, sorry, that blade cuts both ways. So yes, if you want to prioritize your skill training, you want to prioritize your skill training. You don't want to burn yourself out before you come into the gym by running 50 miles and then coming in for your deadlift day, right? However, you have to look kind of the other way too, that it's like, well, in a real life situation, am I always going to be perfectly rested and prepared for this? Or should maybe my body be used to operate, like specifically with the martial arts stuff or with the firearms training? So we do introduce some deliberate fatigue, you know, of specific energy systems for those same situations. But yeah, generally speaking, we're doing the exact same thing, and for, you know, different, subtly different flavors, but we found the same results as well. And the big question is how much are you doing it? The only other thing I would add is the dynamics change, and you can do quite a bit more if you can. Not all athletes can do this, but if you can get schedule wise and physiology wise, you can get them to take a nap. And, you know, 30 minute nap, even up to 60-minute nap, and a small meal, carbohydrates and electrolytes in that training window between those two. And this is talking about the AMPK and mTOR relationship, and that they've seen it in the same studies that analyze both, that showing the introduction of glycogen, you know, replenishing after an AMPK heavy workout, you know, prepares, et cetera, et cetera. But, everyone wants it to be all or nothing. They want it to be a switch that, you know, you can't run and lift, you can't do that. And it's like, dude, it's a nuanced thing. This is physiology. How much? When? How are you doing this? How are you organizing this? How are you recovering from this? So, you know,
it could even change within a week, right? Like one day you could lift and you can run after,
for sure.
And the next day you could switch it if you needed to or wanted to, or just like doing that.
Yeah.
And yeah, people train for enjoyment. So
yeah.
Fucking stop wasting so much time arguing about this on the internet and get training. That's kind of where I always come to this conclusion when I get drawn into this conversation too much online.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
It goes back to, I think, can't remember whether it was this podcast or the previous one. I think spending so much time trying to find the perfect training program that's perfectly in line with the science and ticks all these boxes won't happen, because science is so variable and ever changing. But the basic principles that underpin it are largely irrefutable. So if you just get to work and figure it out as you go, build the wings as you fly, and then take the lessons and adjust them over time, you will have more context on yourself and the individual athlete, if you're on a coaching capacity, on how the knowledge that is out there applies to that individual context. But training is trial and error. Mm-hmm. Training is trial and error within an imperfect ecosystem. People have jobs, people have kids, people eat different food. Yeah. Things are within context that need to be borne in mind, and I think there's so much time wasted on looking at things in isolation when those things in isolation are so massively affected by the external stresses that need to be considered as well.
Yeah. You see so many people stressing all of their energy on that last 1 to 5% when they haven't nailed the first 95 to 99.
Recovery is the buzzword that really has lost its meaning in that sense, because if you're doing too much training in the first place, the very expensive recovery metric that can save you 1 percentage point isn't going to be the thing that brings you back from the proverbial dead. No. So ice baths are fantastic. Massage guns can have their place once you've got the basics nailed. It's a pyramid.
Agreed.
And in building recovery and recoverable volume into programming, I think, is the pillar that really people should focus on a little.
I think also too, people might hear like an hour, they might hear 10 sets. Do your best to put your kind of earmuffs on and just implement whatever you think should be best for you. An hour and doing 10 surges is a lot of work. Maybe for somebody new that's listening, this is you're going back and forth on a half-hour walk, and you're doing minute faster walk pace. Yep. Like you're walking and you look at your phone and it says you're going 2 miles an hour, and now you're trying to speed up to go 3.5 or 4 miles an hour. You can kind of rev these things up in whatever way that you want, but the whole point is that there is a difference between you going at your kind of slowest, most modest pace and you going at a more aggressive pace.
For sure. Just like, if someone's first going into the gym, they would never just do a clean and jerk. You really need to work on that before you get to that, especially at a heavier weight. But because walking and running are so like just human nature, people just think they can do them, but you really can't. You got to be really careful in this process and really, really just listen to your own body more than you're going to currently listen to David Goggins type of thing. Yeah. Because I absolutely love that guy. I follow him. I think he's incredible. But in a moment of inspiration and motivation, you might want to get frickin' fired up and think, what if? I'm gonna find that dark place and I'm gonna go kill this thing. It might turn around and kill you. Like you might get injured, you might get put out, and then there's no hole or pocket in life you can kind of place that motivation and inspiration into now because you just tried to do something too soon. So slowly building yourself up with those fartleks, I think, is a great way to get things going. I also think slowly building yourself up with the longer, slower duration stuff too. So like with our fartleks, we are working on the background jogging while recovering at the same time. We're working on developing those bursts so that we can get past opponents, get over hills, finish strong, learn more about our own recovery and ability. But those long, slow, that's just where we're working pure mileage. We're just working aerobic. We're getting aerobic capacity up. We are actually teaching the body to be able to handle that structural work as well. That repeated springing, that repeated running, you're going to have an adaptation over time that's going to be able to handle that a lot better when you're doing long and slow rather than the interval work. So I think if you're just starting out and you don't want to do fartlek, tempo, interval, long and slow, if you think that that's way too much to get things started with, I would definitely, maybe front load the week with a fartlek workout, maybe back load the week with a long and slow run, and then in between, just do what makes you happy. If it's total body strength training, an upper and lower split, whatever it's going to be, I think those two would be the safest to start with.
I think a lot of people don't understand the benefits of a slow run. A slow, like running much slower than you want to run. Yeah, I think maybe that's misunderstood. I don't think people know, like you might be at like a 12.5 or 13-minute mile pace, which is like almost hard to do. Like, how do I go this slow? Like, doesn't feel great to go that slow. It's kind of almost awkward in a way. And so some people might not understand, but like if your capacity is to run like, let's say a 10.5-minute mile for a couple of miles, which would be pretty good. But you're consistently running 11-minute miles when you go run, you're gonna struggle with adaptation because you're training at a little bit too high of a percentage. Right. So you need to back off so that you can increase your aerobic capacity. Would you agree with that?
100%. And there's a lot of benefits. Like we've talked in previous podcasts about like the increased vascularization, increased capillarization, increasing appetite. If a concurrent strength or hypertrophy thing is something that you're interested in. Heart health, there's a lot of benefits that come along with that. But in terms of like getting more into the just the specific running aspect of this, I do think that the structural components of teaching your joints to be able to handle that is important. I also think it's great to learn running technique while you're moving slow, rather than when you're moving fast. So you can work on the technical components of things like you're talking about on Instagram all the time. That's absolutely huge. When you're moving slower, you're saying that it's tough to almost move that slow. I love that because you're going to need some mental toughness in order to keep going with this thing. As we keep stretching out your miles on that long and slow day, if you want to accomplish, you might just start with maybe a 5K as a goal, not a workout. You might want to start with a 5K and then a 10 and then maybe a half marathon and then maybe a full. As that kind of continues to get stretched out, a lot of mentality comes into this because the workouts are long. You're at a point now where some of those long and slow ones, you're out there for a very long time. And would you agree it's as much mental as it is physical?
Yeah, it's a big deal to try to figure out how do I occupy myself for 4+ hours.
Yeah, it's an absolutely huge deal, man. So, I mean, between the technique, between the mental toughness, the structural integrity, and the very fact that your aerobic system does support your anaerobic system. So basically, when you are doing an anaerobic output, let's say in the intervals that we can still get into, and you're doing an anaerobic output, that is a very glycolytic and anaerobic event. So stored ATP, creatine, carbohydrates, they're going to be your preferred fuel source here. Anaerobic conditioning is supported by aerobic conditioning because when you're burning aerobic metabolites to support aerobic ATP production, the aerobic system is what actually increases the rate at which those are replenished. For phosphocreatine, for glycogen to get back into the muscle. The capacity at which your aerobic system is developed will increase the rate at which you recover in between anaerobic bouts. So those two can happen at the same time and support each other. So that long and slow, it's not just isolated, it supports all the other things that you're doing as well, including strength and hypertrophy training, which are also anaerobic.
I was going to say, doing a lot of aerobic training is something that a lot of people believe is going to make them lose muscle over time. There's, one of the old examples that people usually bring up is like, oh, look at an endurance runner versus a sprinter. Look at those physiques. But why is it that this aerobic training can be beneficial for athletes that do strength training? Is there a way that they should pay attention to how much aerobic training they do at the intensity that they do aerobic training?
Yeah, you want to actually keep it low and slow. So like to add more intensities, we're talking about self-perceived outputs for fartlek. And for this one, I'd keep it about 4 out of 10. You really want to be going at a slow clip and you got to keep yourself there slow because if you don't have a directed intention towards a specific energy system, then you end up in this weird, gray, muddy world where you're not getting the maximum benefits of the thing that you're supposed to be doing, and you're adapting somewhere in the middle.
Your recovery will be hard.
Yeah.
You'll be sore from your run, and you shouldn't be. And
those other fitness qualities are either trained elsewhere in the week. Like you're actually already targeting those with, say, an interval or a tempo, or definitely with fartlek. When you have that long and slow approach, then that's something where you've got to keep it super, super slow, and you want to gain the maximum benefits of aerobic only, because anaerobic, or if you want to get even nitty or grittier, the alactic, lactic, and aerobic. If you're already training these other two, to muddy this one hurts nobody except for you. So keep it super low intensity and understand that we're doing it in isolation because it's supporting everything else that you're doing.
So how about tempo runs versus, because like when you talk about fartleks, someone's probably thinking, well, isn't that just doing intervals, or what's the difference between intervals, tempos, and fartleks? So what's the difference between those?
Sure. So when you're doing a tempo run, that's basically when you're trying to push your threshold up. So you're kind of essentially dialing in and keeping your race pace, or increasing rather your race pace. So basically when you're running, you are going to run at a certain pace. And if you're running slow, then you're not going to produce a lot of fatigue metabolites. So you're able to maintain this pace because your clearance of fatigue metabolites out of the muscle is very easy for you at that point in time. But as you continue to run faster, you're going to continue to produce more and more fatigue metabolites until you reach something known as your threshold. When you have a threshold, you are running at a pace that is equal to your clearance of fatigue buildup. This threshold is really what we're trying to push up in your tempo training. Okay. That's what we want to increase so we can actually increase your race pace without inducing more fatigue, which is something like intervals would do, where our fatigue accumulation rather is outpacing our ability to clear it. So therefore we are going to progressively slow down and slow down and slow down. In terms of a tempo run, that is something that should feel comfortably uncomfortable. like a 6 to 7 out of 10. That's where you should be hanging out at for a tempo run. Whereas in a fartlek, that's something where you're going to introduce those 8 out of 10 surges. And it makes it different than intervals because your fartlek training, you're jogging the entire time and then having your bursts, which is very sport specific to the event of a half marathon or a marathon. Whereas intervals is hard walk, whereas fartlek is hard jog. That's what really separates the two. And fartlek being speed play and intervals being do what I say, there's a lot more control to the interval world to where we are getting this specific adaptation. I want this to be a very anaerobic bout. And this is going to play in a big way to something known as the principle of speed reserve. So Charlie Francis, he was a speed coach back in the day for Ben Johnson, super famous guy for people in the industry. He was a real pioneer in the world of a lot of this stuff. And he has a principle called the principle of speed reserve. And it basically operates to where if my peak speed is higher than someone else's peak speed, if we're both operating at 70%, I'm still faster than you. But since we're operating at 70%, our fatigue accumulation is the same. So even though I'm moving faster than you, I am not producing more fatigue than you because I have a higher peak speed than you.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a sneaky way in which you can gain, like a lot of this stuff, you can see how this kind of all ties together where anaerobic supporting aerobic, aerobic supporting anaerobic, aerobic helping us recover faster from anaerobic bouts, but anaerobic bouts pushing up our peak speed so that our speed reserve is higher than other people's, which allows us to sustain a better race pace for a longer period of time. So we've got our anaerobic pushing type 2 fibers, principle of speed reserve, peak speed output, and a lot of just overall workout efficiency because not a lot of people have time to go for a long and slow several times per week.
Yeah.
And in terms of bang for the buck, intervals really smash that. The tempo is increasing our threshold. The fartlek is our speed play, one of my favorite ones that anybody can do to learn their body, but get a good idea on how prepared they are for competition. And then we have our long and slow. That is like the 4 runs where if you're really taking your running seriously, those 4 would all be introduced to give you the most well-rounded approach to your running program.
And by the way, when it does come to tempo runs, is that like a 6 or 7 for the whole duration of the run, or there aren't any periods where you increase speed or slow down, right? It's that speed for the whole run.
Yeah, so there is different ways to do this, different coaches, so you can actually have tempo intervals. So they're aerobic intervals. It's a weird kind. I know it sounds a little bit weird. People are used to intervals just being high intensity interval training and very anaerobic. But when you control the intensity, you can actually control and do tempo based intervals. It's something I've done a lot for actual athletes in the past in multidisciplinary sports to where you need speed, agility, conditioning, strength, hypertrophy all at the same time, like hockey players, fighters, those kinds of people. I've done intervals for tempos in the past, more so for a recovery workout. That's basically how I've structured my training for my athletes to where we'll do intervals, tempo intervals, more as active recovery, but something that's going to produce more fatigue is like what I'm doing for Mark, which is that constant tempo pace. You're going to rock and roll with that thing for 30 minutes up to like a max of 45 at the absolute most, because once you are moving at that clip for that long a period of time, it's just you're simply gonna start losing the fatigue management battle.
Gotcha.
Yeah, tempo run is just kind of annoying. Like it's just you like running at like kind of a normal, whatever like a normal good pace would be, and then you just ticking it up just a notch or 2 above that.
Comfortably uncomfortable.
And you're like, this is like it starts to nag at you. You know, you're like, all right.
I know, because you either want to slow down or speed up, but you're just comfortably, and that's what it should feel like. Like that's actually, you're at the threshold. Like you're right there. That's not a very comfortable place to be. Your mind either wants to back off or it wants to actually get after it. But when you're working that clearance, you're doing a lot of things that are going to help you on race day.
What about intra-workout nutrition? You know, we hear a lot about branched chain amino acids, essential amino acids, hydration, and carbohydrate intake, and these kinds of things. What can these things do for us? And yeah, what's your take on it?
Sure. So basically, there's 4 rules you want to follow during training. Actually, before, during, and after training. You got 4 golden rules. Maintain a readily available flow of glucose. Maintain a readily available flow of amino acids. Get hydrated. And accomplish goals 1, 2, and 3 while minimizing gastrointestinal upset. Because nobody is going to perform well if they have bloating, distension, gas, farts, those kinds of things. Nobody performs well at bloating. So with your glucose, your amino acids, and your hydration, these are all hyper key to maximize performance. So glucose, for example, glucose is going to be an excellent fuel source for muscular output because of muscular glycogen. But a lot of people don't know that blood glucose is also a preferred fuel source for the nervous system. And your muscles are a whole lot like an engine, and the nervous system is like the driver. Doesn't matter how powerful your engine is if there's no driver behind the wheel. The nervous system is what's recruiting those muscle fibers and allowing them to contract with maximum strength and maximum velocity. So I really like a combination of muscle glycogen and blood glucose in order to maximally create both nervous system and muscular performance. On top of that, carbohydrates help uptake electrolytes into the muscle cells faster than they otherwise would have. If you just have water and electrolytes, or if you have water, electrolytes, and carbs, carbs help uptake them faster. You'll see in hospitals, they've got something known as Pedialyte. If you are having enough diarrhea and vomiting to the point where you can have severe dehydration to the point of death, they'll actually have a lot of Pedialyte for you, and that contains sugars because it hydrates you faster. So we're going to have carbs for nervous system, muscle system, and to enhance hydration. From an amino acid perspective, there is a lot of different benefits coming from the world of amino acids. Each amino acid can be explained in detail, but a big thing for me is like BCAAs versus EAAs. Your branched chain amino acids, they're really just showing up for work in terms to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. A lot of research on BCAAs stimulating muscle protein synthesis, because they do, but they don't provide the raw materials to actually repair and grow that muscle. So you can imagine it like a construction worker showing up for work, but he didn't actually build any raw materials in order to create and build that project that he's working on. EAAs do provide those raw materials. So you get the leucine, isoleucine, and valine from branched chain amino acids, but then you also get the other amino acids that are responsible for actually repairing muscle tissue. And when you stimulate muscle protein synthesis, but don't provide the amino acids to actually repair it, well, then the only other place they're going to get those amino acids from are other areas of your body. So you can undergo something known as protein redistribution, where it might be like, well, Nsima's quadricep is broken down right now, and he hasn't used his rear delt in a little while. So we're going to redistribute that protein from that area of the body in order to support the repair process here. So if we did an MRI on you, your legs got bigger, but you didn't actually build net muscle. It just redistributed from one area to the other. So BCAAs, they're only a stimulus for muscle protein repair and growth, but they don't provide the raw material. So I do like to hang out more over here in the EAA perspective for stimulus and raw material. But on top of that, glutamine helps uptake electrolytes faster than they otherwise would have been, just like carbohydrates do. Tyrosine is a precursor for dopamine, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. So we're getting more of a neurochemical effect on top of just the raw materials at play here. We have glycine that's also beneficial towards uptaking electrolytes as well. Taurine, excellent for minimizing cramps. It plays a huge role in electrolyte homeostasis, and taurine, even at doses as low as 1 gram, has been demonstrated to reduce delayed onset muscle soreness in double-blind placebo-controlled trials. So in that intra-workout window, putting the carbs in for all of those reasons, we're getting actual EAAs or even a full protein powder during training for all of the reasons discussed there. In terms of hydration, well, there's 2 kind of roads that you could take towards this. The first road simply being electrolytes. So if we had sodium is responsible for muscular contraction, potassium being responsible for muscular relaxation, we're getting contraction effect with sodium, but we're also getting anti-cramping effect from potassium. And then magnesium is what regulates concentrations of sodium, potassium in and out of the cell. So we need all 3, and a real easy recommendation to make is a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio. Sodium, potassium, magnesium, 100 to 200 milligrams of each in order to get maximum anti-cramping, maximum velocity and contraction efforts, but also the optimal regulation of what those things are doing as well from the magnesium. And we're going to combine that. We still need to make this thing gastrointestinally friendly. So we have to actually make this drink in a drink that is 6 to 8% solution. So that means if we have a 16-ounce water bottle, well, 6 to 8% of that solution, or 8% of that solution, is 40 grams. So that means if we have a 16-ounce water bottle, only 40 grams of stuff, combined amino acids and carbohydrates, can be mixed into that bottle for minimizing gastrointestinal distress. If it's more than 8%, then it actually is not enough water to act as a transporter to get it out of the small intestine. So then you end up with something sitting in your gut. You took a bunch of stuff to enhance your performance and recovery, but it's not getting to where it actually needs to go, which is the muscle tissue. So accomplishing the 4 golden rules of intra-workout nutrition, we're getting EAAs or whole protein. We're getting our carbohydrates. I prefer branched cyclic dextrin or Vitargo. We're getting hydration, which is enough water to make it a 6 to 8% solution with a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio of potassium, sodium, and magnesium. And when you set it up in that solution, we did it in a gastrointestinally free way.
When you mentioned the electrolytes, when you see most electrolyte brands, it's more sodium than obviously potassium and magnesium. It's not usually 1-1-1.
Right.
Why is that? Do you know?
Yeah, we deplete sodium at a faster rate than we do the other electrolytes. So you'll see that's why actually armpits get white over time in gym shirts, or maybe that's just mine. But if you're a saltier sweater, then you can have whiter armpits in your shirt from salt over time. You'll even see it in gyms, depending on the grossness of the person there. If you go to a bench, and there can actually be salt lining like around. That's a salty sweater.
Nice.
So if somebody is a salty sweater, then they can have a 2-to-1 solution or a 3-to-1 solution, because we do deplete more sodium than we do the other. A safe recommendation is 1-to-1-to-1, because a lot of people already have more than enough sodium in their diet. So the 1-to-1-to-1 is kind of a global recommendation I can make. If I do want to be more specific with it, then that's when I'll do something like sweat testing, like we're doing this Friday.
Can the solution get too diluted with too much water?
No, it can't. It depends on how much water you add, right? Because,
like 24 ounces with that same ratio for a 16-ounce cup or whatever.
Yeah. So your small intestine can uptake about 1 liter or so of water per hour. Okay. So taking that in, that's you're going to be excreting it. So long as it's gastrointestinally friendly, that's like the main goal. You don't want to have too little to where it's too concentrated of a drink, but you also don't want to have too much to where it ends up being gastrointestinally unfriendly again.
The main thing is you don't want it too sludgy. You don't want to 100 grams of carbs in this tiny little thing of water. It's not enough water to get it all to pass through properly.
Yeah, and if you're having too much, the easy way to look at that is you shouldn't weigh more post-workout than you did pre-workout. You do pre and post-workout weigh-in. You don't have to be very manic about it and do it every single time. But if you are training in the same environment for the same amount of time, like going to grappling for 90 minutes, you get a pretty good estimation on how much fluid you should be consuming.
What do you think this would do for somebody? Do you think this is appropriate for someone doing jiu-jitsu to drink a drink as you're mentioning, or is this more for someone who's specifically doing a conditioning workout?
I think that this is for someone doing strength training, hypertrophy training, conditioning, grappling. No matter what athlete I'm working with, I've got 2 goals. I want to maximize performance. I want to maximize recovery. That type of combination is going to maximize performance, more chemically from the neurotransmitter and hormone thing that we talked about, but then also structurally with the supplying the fuel and demand chain of the expenditure that you're involved in. So I'm maximizing performance through those pathways. But when you have good intra-workout nutrition, you're quite literally starting the recovery process before the workout's even over. So regardless of your goal, if the intensity is there, you're going super low intensity, then whatever. But if you're high intensity, or if you're fasted, then I do like introducing some nutrition in there to make sure that you're getting what you need.
Around how many carbohydrates? It would probably depend on the size of the person, and things like that. But around how many carbs do you recommend?
Typically for females, 25 to 35 is plenty. And typically for males, 35 to 45 is plenty. Those are like very easy, broad recommendations. And then you can kind of work with your body subjectively after that. But if you did want to get technical here, in terms of transporters in the small intestine, there's something known as sodium-dependent glucose transporter 1 in the small intestine.
Oh, yeah. And Nsima and I were talking about that this morning.
Yeah. Your body can uptake 1 gram of glucose per minute. So that is about 60 grams of glucose per hour. So, but further research, you guys are probably talking about glucose transporter 5. That's specific to fruit.
Of course.
Yeah.
Mention that. Yeah.
That's specific to fructose. So that's when you can get it up to 75 grams per hour because it operates through a different transporter. So between glucose and fructose, you can drive that up to 75 grams per hour. But I really don't recommend going over 75 grams per hour because you're exceeding transporter ability.
So actually a question about this too. When an athlete's working out, let's say whether they're lifting or they're grappling, when should they maybe start ingesting that? I would assume like they should have put in a bit of work in the session before they start downing that, whatever that drink is, right?
Yeah. It kind of depends on how soon your pre-workout meal was. So if you ate within an hour of training or 2 hours, there's plenty of circulating glucose and amino acids hanging out in your bloodstream anyway. So you can probably wait before you start drinking your intra-workout shake. But if you haven't eaten, if it's more, I would say within 1 to 2 hours, then you won't need to start it right away. But if you haven't eaten in 2 to 3 hours prior to training, I probably would start drinking it right away, even during the warm-up. But also, I mean, there is kind of a ritualistic component to that too. Like even me, like when I'm having my pre-workout, that is a part of my ritual before I get to the gym and get into a flow. And then even when I'm in the gym, I just like having my intra-workout around. And it's a part of the whole process for me. I personally don't think it matters much so long as everything is still gastrointestinally friendly. If you had a pre-workout meal, those nutrients are hanging around, so you don't need it right away. If you are fasted though, or if your last meal was quite a while ago, let's say you're a 9 to 5er and you ate lunch at noon and you're not going to train till 4:30, then I'd probably start having your intra-workout a lot sooner.
What are the brands that you use? That way we can give people something real specific so they can just go and like get some of the magic sauce that you're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. So I typically hang around with Clean Athlete K. So Clean with a K. Clean Athlete is an excellent brand. Thorn Research is an excellent brand. Designs for Health and Designs for Sport are all excellent brands. All of those products are fantastic.
Carb that you use is, what's that one called?
The Vitargo. Vitargo is a carb that I absolutely love. I've been using Vitargo for a very, very long time for performance, but also for things like weight cuts and that. And there's also a supplement brand called Hostile, operated by Fouad Abiad. He's a retired IFBB pro bodybuilder. His formulations are fantastic. The product, his company is the real deal. So I would add their company to the list of a lot of the stuff I use the most with all my guys.
How do you use liquid carbs for a cut?
For the rehydration and refueling.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah,
I got you now.
That's how we get the weight back on. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Power Project family, your normal shoes are making you weak. This is why you partner with Vivo Barefoot Shoes, because they have a wide toe box, they're flat, and they're flexible. So with every single step you're taking, if you're taking a 10-minute walk outside, or when you're working out in the gym, your feet are able to do what they're supposed to do in this shoe. They have tons of options for hiking, running, training in the gym, chilling and relaxing, casual shoes for if you're out on a date. You need to check them out. And Andrew, how can they get it?
Yes, that's over at vivobarefoot.com/powerproject, and you guys will receive 15% off your order automatically. Again, vivobarefoot.com/powerproject. Links to them down in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
I know there's probably a few people that are focused on building muscle and bodybuilding, and let's not think about the ones who are just at the top level competing, but what is the minimum amount of aerobic cardio that they can get away with per week that would benefit their lifts, ability to gain muscle over time? Like what's the minimum?
3 20-minute sessions per week.
Just 3 20-minute sessions per week?
It does not take a lot. Like people say, I'll never do cardio. It does not take a lot in order to begin to get benefits, especially when you're starting at ground zero. So I would say that would be an absolute minimum. You can do that upon waking with your dog. You can do that post-workout. That low of intensity is not going to create an interference effect with your gains, and it's something I would highly recommend, even if you're in a bulk. That amount of energy expenditure, it's not going to interfere, but it's also going to stimulate your appetite to even support your bulk even further and keep your heart healthy as you continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger depending on your size.
If you enjoyed this episode, which I know you did because you got this far, then click this one right here because you'll enjoy this one just as much. And if you're choosing to still listen to me currently as I'm telling you to go over here and watch this video, well, hey, that just means you like the sound of my voice. And well, I'll just keep seducing you right here.